My name is Madison McCormick. I want to first thank you guys for coming tonight and welcome you for being here. I am a Global Liberal Studies junior here at NYU Florence, concentrating in contemporary culture and creative production, and I'm very excited for tonight. I think we're in for an interesting conversation. Tonight's dialogue is entitled Global Literature and Poetry, Looking Towards Technology as a Way to Represent the #contemporary. As I've spent close to 9 months in Florence now, the concept of the contemporary is a tricky one to define, especially in a city that invests so much of itself into the past. Some of you may have heard or participated in LPD's blog, Mapping the Contemporary Florence, a new project set out to explore and mold the definition of contemporary here in Italy, and specifically Florence. Throughout the year, I've asked many what the contemporary means to them, and I've received various responses. For example, in the context of art, the previous director of Palazzo Strozzi said that we are the contemporary. We produce art, and therefore we are the contemporary, so we define what it means to be contemporary. But what we are here to discuss tonight is more along the lines of how we produce these creative productions, specifically literature and poetry in this contemporary stage. Right now, in this moment, I'm sure each of us has some kind of smartphone or electronic device that we use to communicate on our bodies or in a backpack or purse in front of us, no? Has anything changed since we have become so dependent on the digital world? Although we are not here tonight to try and define the contemporary, I'm hoping that this conversation will become a beneficial part in mapping the contemporary. I invite everyone to please ask questions or offer comments, and we want this to be as much of a group discussion as possible. Now, I am pleased and honored to briefly introduce the fantastic speakers sitting next to me. We have a very special panel tonight with two sides of the paper represented, both publishers and authors. Will Cox and James Bird from London, out of London, are two innovative publishers and co-founders of Belleville Park Pages. Belleville Park Pages started in a tiny box attic in Paris in 2013 and has continued to grow since. They publish pocket-sized prints of contemporary writers from around the world every 2 weeks. And as I'm sure they would like to emphasize, it sells for only £2 or euros, which is less than a pint of beer. Can't argue with that. In 2013, Foils magazine commented on Belleville Park Pages saying that their content is as ever, fresh and inspiring, but the real victory here is its continued innovation. And Trinity College News stated that, in a world ever turning towards the digital and away from the print, the Belleville Park Pages is a new literary journal flying the flag for tangible literature. Now, turning the page, we have two contemporary Florentine authors and poets, Alessandro Roveggi and Vanni Santoni. Alessandro is an author, scholar, and professor of Italian literature. He spent 2 years pursuing a postdoctoral research fellowship in Mexico and has written many novels and publications in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. Alessandro is the curator and co-owner of Forward, a crowdfunding project for contemporary art and literature, and director of the literary festival at NYU Florence, the Writers' Season. He has also found success in using social media platforms, such as Twitter and blogging as an author, and experimenting with live storytelling at last Thursday's Nota Bianca, and with one of his novels in which he includes a CD based on the book. Last, but certainly not least, we have the distinguished author Vanni Santoni. In addition to writing numerous novels, Vanni founded SIC, Scrittura Industriale Collettiva, with Gregorio Mangini. SIC stands for Writing Industrial Collective in English and indicates both a method of writing, which can be found in a manual on the website, and the open community of writers who use it. Out of SIC came Territorio Nemico, or Enemy Territory in English, and a novel written by 230 hands, a collective of 115 authors around the world. So, with that, I would like to start our discussion with a question. How have new technological platforms influenced your or creative writing in general? So with that, would you guys like to start?
Hi. I think to begin with, I'll talk about how our publication has responded to, say, technological changes in the fact that what we produce is like the size of a smartphone, which I think is incredibly important for a lot of people. The carrying of a book for people in a contemporary world where the present is quicker than ever and everyone's rushing about and things need to be smaller. The carrying of a book is actually an issue for a lot of people. Something the size of a book, it doesn't fit into a pocket. So we made the Belleville Park Pages so that it would always fit into a back pocket. Or like the phrase we like to use for it is a tangible hyperlink, in that it's very simple and easy to carry around and have and pass on and move around, basically. So yeah, that's what I'd say regarding the Bellwood Park pages, how that has reacted in form to technological advancements like that.
I guess in terms of touching on like the individual versus the collective, I think at least some of like the new movements in literature are very internet-based, both in their content and in how they're produced. I think probably people on this side can speak a little bit more to that because ours is technically a print publication. But I think one of the things that at least I see is a lot of very rapid changes in style. So you'll see one person on the internet get a little bit of micro fame or whatever for some new style or some new idea, and then you'll see a lot of people mimic that right away, and then none of these things last very long because it's so capable. So somebody get attention one day, some mimic, and then a new thing, and then some more mimicking, and kind of just keeps going on and on. So I guess for the collective, that is maybe the influence there.
So what you're saying is like because of this technology in the collective writing, almost creative kind of becomes mimicking, like people are kind of playing off each other, or?
I think that you just see a lot of interplay between people's work in a much more rapid pace. So style will change much quicker now, whereas the publishing cycle is still. I know a lot of people who are getting their first books published who they've signed now and they're not published until 2017. So if you're thinking about that with print literature, you post, you print, something gets published and your style is only, you can only match that pace. But if you're doing online publications or whatever, that pace is so quick now and so capable of changing rapidly.
Well, I think that's, I'm pretty sure that a technology, especially digital technology, has influenced literature, contemporary literature, in a good sense, in a bad sense. The good sense is that if you want to be an author, I think today you have to be online in a sense. But it's not necessary being on Twitter, no? Being online means using probably a platform as WordPress to work on a project, for example, to collecting materials for a novel, as I've done for my first novel, and also be online and going digital means work for and collaborate with a newspaper or with a review, literary review, because we have to, I think, underline that in Italy the most important reviews are online. Literary reviews are online. Nazione Indiana is, for example, one of them. Minima Moralia is a literary review based on the Minimum Fax project and the Minimum Fax publisher. So for an author, it is necessary to be online, no? But at the same time, for a new writer or for someone who is trying to be a writer, could be also a trap in some sense, because you can find also many traps, no? Like, for example, self-publishing. I really hate, in a sense, self-publishing. I wrote with Vanni and other Italian writers, for example, Giorgio Vasta, two articles on
some rants.
And on Il Manifesto about that. Not how this idea of I'm a writer because I published a book online is a bad idea. No, and so. You have to be online because you have to use platform. You have to use platform as a methodology, also to encounter new writers, no? Read new writers. You can't live anymore only as a writer at the Biblioteca Nazionale. You have to read the New Yorker online. You have to be on many other different reviews. You have to know the Belleville Project, and so you have to move online in a sense, no? And use the opportunities. But at the same time, beware of this idea of I'm a writer because I'm publishing online a book that probably they ask money for that. No, so this is not the idea of technology that I support and that I.
So do you see, I guess, new contemporary, young authors just who post online? Do you think that's a new concept that, oh, because I post online, I'm an author, and there's this misconception of all the steps that need to happen in between?
Could be this problem, but again, I think that is a very good workshop as well. No, not this self-publishing idea,
right,
but the idea to publish online and see the feedback of your audience and also comments. No, it could be good. For some Italian literary review have been also kind of a massacre because commenting is a way of stalking sometimes an author, another author or a critic, no, and in Italy, no? I mean, in Italy, I don't know.
It's another nickname, but what's this rubbish?
Again, see. So I think this could be the problem, but in general, I always recommend to be on platform, to go in digital, no, in a sense.
Thank you, Madison, for this invitation. It's an honor to be here and a pleasure. And Alessandro has already touched some of the key points, I guess, because there is, I would say, triple level of influence of technology, of new technologies in the life of the writer. Is about the public image and narration of the writer. It's about the promotion and the existence of the text in different types of mediums, such as ebooks, for example, or blogs. And it is also about an eventual change in the structure of the content, even inside a book. So I think that as far as the literary debate is concerned, of course, much has moved in the internet for reasons independent from the internet. The fact is that the newspaper have less and less money and give less and less space to the cultural and literary debate. So now the cultural pages of the main newspapers in Italy, but not only in Italy, are a very short series of reviews when it's a good day. Otherwise there are no reviews at all. And there is no space nor time for the debate. And hence the debate has moved into literary magazines, which are mostly online, and also which are mostly volunteer work based, which is a problem as well, because of course I am much more eager to write a 10 pages article about a new author if I'm paid. Otherwise, odds are that I will write a couple of pages article and think that I'm already a philanthropist. But still, this definitely happens, and this means that an author, for example, if he wants to promote properly his own books, he has to be present. There are still authors in Italy which are completely absent from the web, but you have to be present because, of course, the aforementioned Nazione Indiana or Carmilla, I could name at least 10 to 20 different literary blogs or magazines which are online, and where having a review of your own book, it's almost as relevant as having it in one of the main newspapers. So it does matter. And of course, it does matter to be on the social media because, of course, it's a way to keep in touch with your inner circle of readers, with the hardcore fans, if you want, the people that guarantee that will read your book and hopefully talk about it if they like it. Then I think that there is change in the way the text, especially for an emerging writer, is proposed, because blogs have been, now I would say they are a bit less, but at least in their first 10 years of existence, they have been very powerful into democratizing the access to publishing. Also thanks a bit to a hype. The bloggers in 2005 were the new thing, now they are old as well. But still, gaining access to publishing, and especially to the big publishing houses, was very difficult. Very often it was based on knowing somebody or getting to know somebody to get that door open, while the rise of literary blogs allowed people to publish their own content and see feedback. And also the main literary blogs worked a bit as secondary level before the publishing houses. I well remember that in 2007, I would say, I had already published my first book, but still when I had the news that I was invited to publish a selection of my writings in Nazione Indiana, this main Italian literary blog at the time, now maybe it has been surpassed by others, I was happy as much as having published a book because I could recognize the importance of that. And then of course there is the whole publishing discourse which is connected with the ebook, which is a different medium, even if it's a book. I'm no big fan of those usual says like the smell of paper, of that kind of stuff. I have no prejudice against the ebook, but one thing that the author must take into consideration very seriously is that an ebook is not a book, it's a different type of, it's like, it's as different as the book was different from the scroll, let's say. It's a different medium, and hence, in writing, the medium, I'm not saying the medium is the content, citing McLuhan, but still the medium does condition and influence the content. And then I would say I will just skip the SIC, the SIC, Scrittura Industriale Collettiva, because maybe we can get over that later. It's a very specific way of using, and unique, I would say, way of using technology to produce literary texts. Another thing I would say, it's the fact that there has been a change, maybe anthropological, but maybe even neurological in the way we use information. I, as everybody else, usually keep 6, 7, 8 different tabs open. I tweet while I listen to music, while I answer to a message in Facebook, while I open even another window while I click the links. And so this has made our mind completely approaching the flow of information in a completely different way. And I can recognize that this is altering the way I read. For example, I always read 10 to 12 books at the same time. One I read for real, a couple of them I just check them out. One I started, then I stop, and then I restart afterwards. And so we are developing different skills. And I think that writing can and should also take this into consideration. I make just an example. The fact that, for example, data is now less relevant to be put inside, for example, a novel. Because data, of course, in the internet, one would never put a sentence to specify who's somebody which he's citing in an article, because of course you can Google him and get it. So one day I was writing this novel and I was mentioning this Alex Gray, which is a basically unknown artist of psychedelic imagery, and I was thinking, should I put Alex Gray there, not very known psychedelic whatever? And then I said no, because I was in the mind of the character, and so the character just thought. And he saw a man passing by and he thought he looked like Alex Gray. And I just say that excellently because I thought if some reader needs to know who Alex Gray is to understand what's happening and to follow the flow of the book, then he will just Google it with his smartphone or with his computer. If he doesn't care, he can just go through the novel, and otherwise putting an additional sentence would be just stopping the poetic and rhythmic flow of the book.
Yeah, thank you. You brought up a lot of great points that I would like to address. I think, firstly, you mentioned publishing and how the ebook and book and just like the scroll, they're completely different. And also, something that I discussed with Will and James previously is how the attention span, like you say, you have 8 tabs up, so you're constantly Facebook messaging while you're reading, while you're writing. So first, do you guys want to comment at all on how you guys kind of fight the drive to the ebook? Like, how do you address that when everyone's looking to be published online, but you're publishing print?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're trying to fight digital print, digital publishing, because more than anything, we want to merge the two ideas. So, I mean, as I said initially, one of the things that we do for that is make it small. So it's almost like it's not in your pocket. It's like it's a smartphone in your pocket. And the other thing that we do is we try to emulate the frequency of digital publishing. So as opposed to so many literary magazines that are in print, they come out every 6 months. maybe a style or a motif that they're using that when they wrote it a year and a half ago is no longer relevant when it finally gets published 6 months later. So by releasing something every 2 weeks, we're trying to almost emulate the previous sort of 2 weeks of writing in the world as digital publishing does, so faster. With regards to attention spans, I really like the idea that Vanya said about having 8 tabs up whilst also having sort of reading 8 books, because there's no difference between those two things. There'll be a tab you look at the most, say Gmail, maybe, and then there'll be other ones that you're looking at to check out, which I think is really interesting because, I mean, part of the reason that we've made the pages so small is because there is a decrease in attention spans. People are seeing things flash up and disappear constantly on Twitter, on Facebook, on blogs, on other forms of social media. And attention spans are decreasing. People are less likely to be reading 800-page novels now because we're living in a world where we're so used to things changing. And that's part of what we're seeing, especially with submissions that we get, is that poetry and short stories are all becoming smaller. They're all becoming shorter so that people can digest them in a shorter time frame.
Kind of to touch on the ebook topic, I personally see the ebook as somewhat irrelevant to the conversation because the ebook is just it is the visual manipulation of a real book onto a page. It doesn't have that much difference besides that it's on a screen. So maybe you interact with the physical touch of the thing more, but to me the ideas needs to jump beyond that. So one of the things I've noticed, especially with a lot of independent small publishers, are if you look at paragraph size. So paragraph size is kind of what you were saying in terms of how you're reading articles and you're bouncing between things. Paragraph size you see is starting to go down to 2 or 3 sentences, and especially 2 or 3 sentences with a line break in between. So you'll be able to grab a few paragraphs and then you'll maybe stop reading and go check on your phone and do something else. So I think that's kind of thing in terms of attention span that I'm particularly interested in, is how not maybe even just the form of how we're touching the thing, but even how it's being presented to us, in layout. So a lot of the other things I'm seeing is people now adding visual content and video content and stuff to their posts and to their things because our minds want to be broken up. We're not reading long form journalism. We're reading, I know for me, I click on an article, read the first 2 paragraphs, and then I watch the video, and then if it's intriguing to me, then I keep going. So I think you're starting to see creative writing match that, where there'll be some things, there'll be some type of visual stimulus or video stimulus, and then it'll move on to back to writing, and then you'll kind of bounce back and forth, and that keeps people interested and keeps people involved in a way that isn't happening yet. And I think we might start seeing that, maybe not now or even 10 years from now, because the old guard is still controlling publishing and still controlling the logic there. So it's still going to look like that. But maybe when we're 50, 60, you're going to start seeing whole new forms and whole new visuals on what the novel is.
That's a cool point. Would you like to talk about your book, where you kind of had an interesting format, I guess, a little more experimental, and with the CD? Okay. Yeah.
Well, the idea of the book is, the title is La trasfigurazione degli animali in bestie. It's a small book. It's a collection of poems based on the kind of a rewriting of the conquest of America from the point of view of the conqueror. It's kind of like a booklet for instruction for how to conquer another country, but in a sense is ironic, no? So I was working on this book in Italian, but also just thinking in Spanish. So I was just working with 2 media, in a sense, with 2 instruments. So at the same time, I always went on kind of a spoken word poetry in my first part of my production. So I called a friend of mine that is a producer of electronic music, and I said, okay, we can have a collection of poems, like a long poem, I say, with a CD, and the CD will be kind of the soundtrack of the poem. So you can read the book in Italian and in Spanish, and you can listen to the soundtrack of the book. So basically every part has 2 tracks, and so you can listen to the track also online and read the book. So, and I also have done a performance on this book with visual art. So because it was included also, I don't know if there's here, but no, this is another one. Well, all the graphics, all the illustration for this book are by Jonathan Calugi. Jonathan Calugi is a famous illustrator, Italian illustrator. So he worked on the concept of this book as well, and he produced also the visuals for this kind of a performance. So it was a kind of an entire production on this topic of, no?
And do you find that was successful in kind of taking a hold of the people's short attention span, as he's saying the form might change in the future? Do you think it
was
be
interesting
like
because
this?
many people just send me the kind of a feedback on this, listening to the music. No, the music was very abstract, but at the same time concrete music, in a sense, the electronic concrete music. No, so it was based on ancient and pre-Hispanic sounds, but also with a lot of contemporary kind of a drum and bass in a sense, no? And many readers just wrote me and say, okay, it's good because I can read at the same time I hear the sound in the background and it doesn't disturb me, no? So it's I think was good. It was fitting in a sense, yeah. No? So the work of the musician was great. I think, and also the effect. I think because sometimes, and also I think it's applied for this collection because this is a collection from a relevant independent publisher. Well, was relevant 5 years ago, but now basically, still relevant. Well, the entire collection was.
The bad temper of the owner hasn't.
See, the bad temper of the owner, but it happens. It happens with the independent publisher, no? No. So, but the entire collection was a collection of CDs and poetry books.
Would you like me to play a little bit of the sound to give
well,
an idea,
if you
or
want,
save
it's kind of
maybe we can get
hard,
a little,
but if you want, yeah.
A sense.
This. You can find another. You can find the entire track online if you want. Eh?
Okay. No, but we have to pay for it, right? No.
No. It's free. It's free. It's on Bandcamp, so
okay.
It's free.
No, that's really great. What was
and
that?
I would like to also to add that that you can also buy the CD alone, just as a project spread from the book. No.
Yeah. No, I think that's I think it's cool how like you and people are taking advantage of this. Since we can't really fight the shorts, this is what's happening where our attention spans are becoming shorter, and maybe we can talk a little bit about Tu letteratura that we did. I think that might go along
I would
the
like to
lines.
finish because I think I don't finish my sentence.
Yeah, of course.
Because you start the music.
Oh, sorry.
No,
you can speak over it.
I would like to say that sometimes you find a poetry book, a book of poetry, and you many times you find a kind of a CD and attached, no? But sometimes you feel that this is superfluous or something that you don't care about. This is not in an entire project, no? So I would like to have an entire project all together, no? So it's not poetry with guitars, with melodic, no. So it wasn't interesting for me. It was kind of a work with the musician, starting from my words all together. So you have a compact disc book. No? So, talk about tweet literatura. Well, I may introduce that, no? Before. We work with Mehdi to this project, with this experiment in my class, because I'm teaching Italian literature here. And we worked on Invisible City in class by Italo Calvino. And I proposed to Mehdi, do you want to join the experiment on Twitter? The experiment was to storytelling, to tell, no, the story or the cities of Italo Calvino books, because Italo Calvino books is a book based on different cities, no? The description of different cities. No? So Mehdi has to tell the story of each city and react to the other Twitter accounts that were in contact with Mehdi. No? So they retweet her at the same time they answer. No? They use the same hashtag. So there was a kind of experiment of storytelling. No? And I think it was a good experiment.
No, it went
I don't
really
know
well. It was a really interesting experience.
In Italian, so it was also
that was
a kind of
interesting as well.
a learning resources.
And they have a huge following, so I'm wondering if maybe this will catch on maybe in the U.S. or somewhere else. But it's an interesting way of, at the end, you create this.
Now
book,
you have also Italian
book.
followers.
Yeah, now I'm Twitter famous in Italy, but
now you are a tweet star.
Tweet star, yeah, exactly. Vanny, do you have anything to add to this? You kind of started
I got a couple of things which were very interesting. The first thing that emerged, it was the problem or issue of the authority of paper, which still exists somehow. And it's interesting because it's very difficult to define, I would say, ontologically, because why is it happening? A couple of days ago, I was reading a study which was ranking the various online newspapers in terms of reputation and credibility as assessed by the readers. And all of the top ranked were newspapers which still had the paper version, while all the lower ones were online only. So the paradox was that even newspapers which had a paper edition in deep crisis still needed that paper edition to be believable somehow. And this happens also in books, because, for example, if you go and check out the various self-publishing platforms, in Italy we have Il mio libro or Io scrittore, you will notice that both of them organize an annual contest where the final prize is to be published by a real publisher in paper. And think that yes, definitely there was also the payoff of the ad for Il mio libro. It was, if they don't believe that you are a real writer, bring them to the Feltrinelli bookshop. So what are we talking about? Is self-publishing the future, or it's just another way to get published for real? And that's interesting because it still means that the book as an object has definitely a meaning. But also it is interesting what they said about the bouncing effect that the wall of text has more and more on readers. I was noticing that in some Italian books, completely disconnected by discourse in the internet, like for example L'invenzione della madre by Peano, which is a writer but it's editor of a big publishing house. He doesn't even have a Twitter or Facebook account, yet in his book all the paragraphs were 3, 4, 5 lines, and they always had the white line in the middle. At the times of Proust, you would use the white line after at least 50 pages, otherwise what are you wasting my time with? And I think that it has to do with that. It has to do with grasping the reader, with being more friendly to the casual reader or the reader which will read a bit of the book or do something different or something else. And what effect does this have on the novel as a cultural object? I think that the novel is still young. I don't think it's finished. Actually, I think that it still has to show its full potential, because only recently it has gained the ability of including almost every other written form. Now in a novel you can put, and I do it, you can put parts of poetry, you can put parts of reportage, non-fiction all together. The novel can really, now we have overcome modernism and we have overcome postmodernism. Now the novel, it's really an object which can get everything inside. The problem is, I think it's a bit on reverse. It will still be a public big enough to make this kind of novels, which could be made now economically sustainable, because nowadays getting more simple and trying to please the reader with short text or open narratives, the fact is that a very big, deep, postmodern, huge novel with walls of text everywhere can have only a couple of thousand readers in Italy. 5,000 if it's extremely well promoted, 10,000 if it becomes a literary case. But even if it sells 10 or 20,000, a huge Pinchonian novel, let's say post-Pinchonian, would require 3 or 4 years to write. So an idea that came out in a debate last year with Tom McCarthy was that maybe now literary novel writer should start thinking about the fundraising options and commercial structure of contemporary art more than of the publishing industry, which is no more completely able to sustain that kind of huge works of art.
Something that we discussed also here last probably was the same debate, no? In our festival, our literary festival so I remember Vincenzo Latronico was one of the guests, and he said he was more comfortable with the word of contemporary art in terms of, as a writer, doing what you want with a page, and imagine kind of a project of a 1,000-page novel, no, more than in the publishing world of literature that is more like, as Vanni said, no, more like looking for short stories, not short story, but simple novels, not very short, very plain and clear and catchy at the same time, no? So it's interesting to see a young writer as Vincenzo Latronico say that he was referring to contemporary art more than the literary world, no? So it's a big...
Yeah, I think you're right in that the publishing world is old. The publishing world is almost irrelevant. It hasn't moved as quickly as almost every other form of art. You look at films and music and even contemporary art, how they market and how they approach the marketing for their works, their product, say, if you're calling a film a product or the TV show a product, the marketing for publishing of a novel is so far behind. You think about TV shows and films and albums that come out, you know the face and you know about the person who is performing or who is has made that film. You know what their face looks like. With writing, even the most famous, let's say the most successful writers of the last 5 years, it'd be very interesting to talk to people and find out if they knew what the writer looked like, because I don't think most people would. And whether that's a good thing regarding does it matter who's written it or not, it's still a part of the marketing of a book that I think publishing houses are missing out on. And I think that the publishing world needs to take a step forward with regards to that, especially with regards to the novel. What do we do with it? Because the novel is still young, and I think it is entering a phase where more forms of writing are sort of eligible to appear in a novel. You're right. Shorter paragraphs, poems, the different things that people are doing with text within the novel is changing rapidly, which is a good thing. But the way that those novels are marketed and the way that they're presented to the world, to the reading world, even people who are interested in books, isn't changing. Maybe it needs something like me and Will have been talking about, the idea of serialization. So going back to how Dickens would do 10 different chapters, as sort of, big American TV shows have an hour-long show every week, and as soon as that show's finished, everyone's like, shit, I've got to wait another week to find out what happens in the next bit. If that was done with a novel, if it was serialized like that, I think they'd have some really interesting reactions to it from readers, because they'd read it and they wouldn't be able to read the next bit until the week later where the next bit was released. And I think that publishers, bigger publishers than we're trying to do different things, but we don't have the money or the power. People look at us like we're still 15-year-olds, which we might look like 15-year-olds, but that's fine. But we're trying to do things differently, whereas most big publishing houses aren't. They're stuck in their old ways, I think.
Thank you. Maybe, Vanny, you can start with this, but I was wondering, we've kind of talked a little bit, kind of like with tua letteratura and your experience with Nota Bianca last week. Has writing become more individualized or dependent on the collective as a result of technology? Maybe you can talk about SIC a little bit.
It is true that technology has brought up new opportunities for collective writing. But it's also true that collective writing is something which has 100 years of history. And actually one could say it's something which has 10,000 years of history because it's the individuality of literature which is a romantic invention. It's something which comes from the 19th century. Before it didn't matter that much who wrote the text, and everybody was kind of allowed to edit it or change it because it was coming from pure storytelling. Then when the author became a product, of course, the focus went more on the author and less on the text. Yet, in the last century, there were more and more experiments in collective writing, and it is true that the advent of technology opened up for bigger possibilities in that sense. Our project, Scrittura Industriale Collettiva, of course, couldn't exist without the internet, but not, please notice, not for literary reason, only for production reasons. Because, of course, if you have 115 authors, you can produce a collective novel by calling them in the same city and working together, but it would become something incredibly costly, and literature or the publishing world simply doesn't have that possibility. So by keeping them connected with the internet made it possible. And also a very simple technology previous to the advent of the internet, which we used and which was essential for the Scrittura Collettiva project. It was the word processor, okay? Because why? Because our project of collective writing didn't involve each person writing a part and then putting everything together. That's not very much collective. It's a sum of parts. We wanted to create a form of collective writing. Yes, absolutely. We wanted to create something which actually put value in the group work, because usually if you make a text in 10 people and everybody writes a part, the general quality of the text will be as good as the worst part of those 10. While in other arts, of course, group teamwork produces better results than what the individual parts wanted to. And so we invented this method, which basically it revolves around writing 10 times the necessary material, having all the single writer writing the single characters, the single scenes, the single moments. Everybody writes his own version, and then an editor or composer takes the best parts and composes this sort of Frankenstein monsters, which then get refined, which are made by the best parts of each individual sheet. For example, if we make a character sheet for the protagonist, every one of the group involved, let's say 10 people, write their own version. So you have 10 possible protagonists written according to certain parameters. And then the composer takes the best ideas and puts them together. Now, this process could be made also with analogical instruments, with paper and pencil, but it would be very messy and enormous energy waste. Probably so much that it would not be possible, in the sense that nobody would last till the end of the novel. Thanks to the internet, we made it, but in the end, an interesting thing to notice is that In Territorio Nemico, even if it's the novel with the most writers in the history of humankind, if we want, we got even recognized by the World Guinness book, actually it's a very traditional novel. It's a historical novel set during the Second World War with 3 intertwined stories, non-postmodern. People were expecting from a project like this some weird Matrix-like cyberpunk punk, psychedelic weirdness. Actually, it's a very traditional historical novel, and I think it's because in our case what technology did was simply to make it possible to do it in 3 years. Without the technology it would have taken 30 years, so we wouldn't have made it, but it would have been possible in the same way. The technology didn't change the content, simply made the timetable realistic.
One of the things that James and I have been talking about a lot recently is this kind of phase that we're in right now, which is we're concerned about like how technology is allowing us to do certain things, and then we're writing like, a lot of books are writing about the fact that we are online, the fact that we are using our Gmail, G-chatting our friends, all this kind of stuff. The thing that I think is actually more interesting and has to do with the collective is that I don't think we should think about the collective as all these writers, but the change of technology, social media, internet culture in the way we perceive the world. And that's, I think, what maybe the collective is actually going to have an influence on. So like I would personally argue that now I look at scenes differently, I look at interactions between people differently because of the internet. So like I'm going to, instead of just being conscious of a sunset or something like that, I'm going to be conscious of that sunset, but also how I might be able to capture it to get my, my internet clout, my social media capital, so that I look better.
And to say how you've seen like you can see 10,000 more sunsets by typing it in on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. So like I think the thing that we actually should be more concerned with, rather than just like how we're using technology to make these things happen, is, and I think this is going to make maybe literature more relevant to a wider audience, is that how we portray this whole new experience that we're having. Like we're living in a very cool time of life because we're kind of that one generation that's going to sit on, like I remember, there's a point of my life where I remember that we didn't have cell phones, and now no generation will sit on that kind of crux after this one. And so I think that if we're thinking about this way we perceive everything because of Vine, Instagram, Twitter, I think of something funny, instead of saying it to James, maybe I want to save it and put it on Twitter. And, that's affecting how I think about every little thing, every little thought, every little image that I see. And I think that's actually the important step, is that we start kind of portraying that idea in our writing, because I don't think people are still stuck in that, okay, I'm on my phone. Yeah, well, everyone's on their phone. It's irrelevant to comment on because it's so casual for everyone to be on. So I think that's kind of maybe the collective.
Yeah, so the way you're processing your surroundings, you're constantly thinking about, who on my Facebook is going to like...
Yeah, and maybe it's not just social media, but it's just the fact that I have all these technologies now.
That they're constantly present with you, even though they're not there. That's interesting. Did you have anything to comment on?
The use of collective, because I think that what social media can do is also just lead you to social contact, real contact as well. Not this is so-called web 4.0. No, it is the future of the web will be in reality, not more anymore online, but it's in reality. So I was interested, for example, in how internet can help you in meeting people and work with people with oral storytelling. So you can use internet as an instrument to find stories and to listen to story, because it's important for a writer to listen. Also, not only to write, because sometimes when you are online, you write a lot, no? And you write nonsense. And you have to listen, no? And this is an ancient idea of storytelling, no? And also, I think also, for example, for poetry, no? Now we are in this new era of poetry where you have performance and oral poetry as a leading, no? Character aspect of poetry. So, but this is due to the digital and technological revolution of poetry. So it's interesting to see how, from digital you arrive to, it's very McLuhan-esque in a sense, but it became more like the need for contact, for a contact. I personally, for example, I'm working, You mentioned the experience at the live storytelling experience at Notte Bianca. This is the idea, no? That I put a call for people online. So you as a citizen of Florence, you can candidate yourself to be the character of my story. So you answer this call, you answer some questions, and I interview you in a sense, and I know you directly using internet, no? And then I have the experience in writing stories based on these interviews and based on photos, no? So it's a way to return to a material and oral experience in literature. So it's interesting for me, this part.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Did you have?
Yeah, I was thinking that another interesting thing that is changing in the context, and it will have, I would say, more long-term effects, is the fact that thanks also to the new technologies, the gray area between the writer and the reader is getting more and more big. We even say, in Italy, they say everybody writes, everybody has a novel in their drawer. I think it's something positive, it's something interesting, because it changes the place where the actually published novels go into existence. There was this sentence by the Chilean writer Roberto Bolaño which said that the masterpieces of literature are like orchids or huge trees, but have you ever seen an orchid or a huge tree outside from a forest? So the whole production of texts is somehow this forest, this environment where the masterpieces can grow. And now this huge, opened up, wide canon of text which is constantly produced has changed completely, because it's not only inside the good, medium, bad, wonderful books, but also in text which are produced in enormous amounts and to which we are somehow exposed anyways, because you will find parts of them in your social media flow. You might stumble over a self-published book even because it was self-published by somebody that you know. You might find it in Google randomly where you were searching about something completely different which is mentioned inside the book. And so in the end, the environment inside which you build your own novel is affected by these texts. And also another thing very shortly about the multimedia content inside the novel. That's a very difficult issue, because one thing is, if you do like Alessandro did effectively with his poetry book, you offer a side dish, okay? You have the poetry book and then you have the music, and as you pointed out, the CD was even an independent product. You could buy it separately. And there are experiments like that, for example, with visual arts and text. It's typical to make that kind of putting them together. While putting the multimedia content inside books, I'm an editor as well. I lead a tiny literary publishing, series inside a small publishing house. And very often I get in touch with manuscripts which include, for example, links to YouTube songs or videos inside the text. And usually this is completely ineffective. It doesn't work very much. I think it's a matter also of digestion of these contents inside the novel. Think about how much time it took to put images or photos effectively inside a novel. Of course, there was Stern, which was already putting everything inside. But still, we came to a synthesis only recently with Sebald, which started producing regularly wonderful novels, masterpieces in case of Austerlitz, which included actively every 20 or 30 pages images which had a very subtle role. They were not illustrations. They were something different which interacted with the text on a very deep and subtle level. Then, given that the video is usually even more complex than an image, probably we still have to conceive the proper way to include a YouTube video inside a novel. Exactly.
That's interesting. Did you anything to add to that? No? Okay. Yeah, of course.
So you basically publish short stories or poetry, no? So you are connected to two forms of literature that are not the dominant one, no? And how does technology affect poetry, for example? Because I'm really interested about this, because poetry is the old sister of the novel, but at the same time is considered very rigid, ancient, and no.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that that's the perception. The older sister.
Not my perception.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people's perception. But I honestly think, this kind of ties into the attention spans we were talking about before, and your points that there's not going to be a lot of, big pension books coming out anymore that are going to get the attention maybe that they deserve. Poetry has so much capability in the modern world. So one of the ideas that James and I are working on is this idea of kind of we're calling it GIF poetry or something like that. It's basically words, images, video, whatever, and it needs to be almost a screen size, because that's what we're used to. That's something that's very consumable, and maybe serialized fiction can fit that, but honestly that's kind of scrolling through. But poetry, especially something that's quick, it's allowed to be short. You can be genius in your how brief you can be. I think that it excites me that we're working on these type of things. Flash fiction is included into that, is one that I'm excited about, because it's one that I have the time to consume. I know I have that time to consume it. I think that's going to be one that a more mass amount of people can actually get behind going forward, rather than actually the novel. I don't think the novel has as much capability in the shrinking attention span. It's really going to have to change. And it's a scary thing. I think maybe everyone who really loves literature doesn't want to see that. But if we're talking about mass media appeal, and like James was saying, this industry has fallen behind. We have no idea what these people look like. Our culture is so image-based that I want to know. I can go on and see what Drake looks like, and see what Kim Kardashian looks like, and I connect with these faces, and these people are people I love. I love these people, kind of thing. No author really has that. A lot of people after they've died have gained that, but we need to really think about what we're doing with this industry. And I think poetry and flash fiction, and especially tying into visuals, whether that's with the person who's creating it or something, is something that's actually a lot more relevant going forward than the novel, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that the novel is at least sick, if not dying, and needs, as we've said, to be changed. The format of the novel needs to be changed.
At the same time, is the form that the market wants, no? And it's strange.
I mean, I think it's
because
interesting.
Short stories and poetry, it's more.
But I think poetry is becoming more relevant than ever before.
Okay.
We've had in England in the last 6 months, we've had 2 spoken word poets in the top 10 of album sales in the country. They're both headlining. They're called George the Poet, and he does a lot of political spoken word poetry and also page poetry, and Kate Tempest, who won the Ted Hughes Poetry Prize Award 2013, 2014, released an album of her poetry that was in the top 10 of the charts. So, and I mean, I think that is partly because it is multimedia, it has sound with it as well, but they're also page poets, they're also selling page poetry as well as releasing music. And I think that poetry it should be more relevant than ever. It's more concise. It is like the text message to the letter. The poetry is to the novel. It has maybe the same information and creativity, and the ability for it to be explored, but it's more concise. And in a world where I'm looking at Instagram and I'm flicking through things, and I look at it for 3 seconds, and then I like that one, and then it's gone, and I like that one. I realise I don't like it, so I unlike it. We need to be drawn in, and shorter form, which poetry generally is. These are all generalisations. Poetry is generally shorter. But it is the standard poem is the average length is far shorter than the novel, and it draws people in. It draws today's consumers in, and I think that is why poetry will become and is becoming more relevant.
I remember a friend of mine, a German slam poet, a famous German poet, that he was on TV every Saturday, and he talked. He was kind of telling me this about this experience, kind of a Woodstock experience in Berlin, with an entire audience of 1,000 people listen to his poetry, and probably this is a difference, a big difference with the Italian situation that we had for poetry, probably.
How you mentioned, I thought that was interesting with like the Drake and the Kim Kardashian. So as authors, do you think that it's important with your social media presence to become almost like an icon, or that people want to connect with you, or do you think that there still needs to be the space between you and the fans for your books?
Well, I think after I post the photos of my baby on Facebook, I think it's not so appealing to be in contact with me. But anyway, probably Vanni has more things to tell about that, because he is a tweet star in some sense, no? Because if you see his follower, he has 1 million follower. No, as Matteo Renzi probably. No,
Matteo Renzi follows me, so
okay,
I'm one of the 500 lucky people. No, seriously. It's another very interesting issue, because of course the social media, especially Facebook, is the most problematic, because of course Twitter is like talking to an audience which chose you, and so there is not very much personal issues involved. You can have the friends on Twitter, but when you, for example, chit-chat with a friend on Twitter, it's public only to the people which follow both of them, so eventually it's a friend of both. And also in Twitter you can very easily promote your stuff and as well keep a public and private discourse. While in Facebook, of course, the private level, Facebook, it's architecture, it's a stalking machine. Basically, the biggest use that people do with Facebook, it's go and seeing the pictures of ex-girlfriends or boyfriend, stalking people, spying people, and also why the timeline is Facebook is so interesting. It's almost scary, because it's not interesting, but it is. I use Facebook only for promotion. I don't even have my own name. I have pages of my various books, and I publish when there is a presentation, when there is an event like this, when reviews come out. So I have a completely commercial way. Sometimes I don't resist, especially if there is something which is politically engaging, I make a post, but usually I try to not use it for personal means. Yet, if I don't put enough care, I very often find myself hypnotized by this flow of pointless information about people I know, and it's a narration as well, and I'm a bit, I think it's not healthy for an author. Let's make an example. We just exactly now with Alessandro, we're talking about an author we both know, which is nowadays lately probably losing his mind or being in a very bad psychological shape, and we were commenting about his, ironically, about his posts, while his books are still very good. So why should you expose yourself as an author by putting your weak points, if you want? Probably his psychosis will be an excellent source of material for his next novels, but if he puts it on Facebook, he breaks the narration too early, and the Facebook fans become in a second just people gossiping around and talking behind his back, and this is scary. I think that the author should not have a personal profile, or of course if he has just keeping his own real friends. You keep 100 friends, it's your real social circle. Of course, nothing bad happens, but at the same time, you cannot promote your book, because otherwise you are breaking people's balls with your book with two people who already know that the book exists. So I think that dangerous is, Facebook is very dangerous for the author. Also the algorithm is, that's very true what Alessandro said, because when we started with Scrittura Industriale Collettiva, we used Facebook for promoting. It was incredibly effective at the beginning. I'm talking 10 years ago almost. You put a link on Facebook and you could see in your Google ads, in Google Analytics, that you make instantly 100, 200 accesses. Now it has changed the algorithm because they want you to pay to reach people you don't know. The only people which see your content is people which already know you. And so you are bothering with your book to all the people which were already at your presentation, who are already supporting you, and you risk having an effect which is quite the opposite.
But I mean, I just didn't think inherently and I don't mean to just fully disagree, but like this is the logic that is keeping, I think, writers irrelevant to more mass appeal, is removing the relevance, because a very big musician or an athlete or something like that, they're not worried about these things. And it's one of those things that, like, yes, maybe we need to think about how to do it best because you have a different connection with your audience. But I would argue that there's very little difference in connection these days between like a singer and a writer, in terms of what we want to get, the connection we want to make with our audience, to our fans. So if we're going to keep talking about the fear and the reasons why we shouldn't, we're going to stay in this boat of like a shrinking relevance. The idea that the amount of times I've heard people talk about is the novel dying. I mean, like that. It's a tired topic. We need to think about what we're going to do so we're not talking about that anymore. Like this, and one of those things is being very social media aware. And it's tough because we want to have time to write and everything. But we have to change our logic because we are slipping, I think, farther and farther away to maybe the money or something.
Well, I think that, I'm sorry, I would like to answer to that, because I think there is a problem, an inherent difference between the author and for example, music star, and it's about the time and type of fruition of the product they are producing. Of course, Beyoncé or Rihanna can say whatever she wants in her Facebook, because if I want to hear the song, I just click and hear the song, while the novel takes time. There was this famous answer of David Foster Wallace to an interviewer which said, why you don't like interviews? And he said, I chose to be a novelist because I think that the only relevant things I can say, they take hundreds of pages. And this is very much in contrast with the very structure of a social network, because if I put a 10,000, let's say, character post in Facebook, people will probably not read it.
David Foster Wallace can say that because he's an incredibly famous figure in writing. He can say that he doesn't want to appear in interviews because people already know who he is. For an emerging writer, I think for somebody who's starting to write, they want maximum exposure to their work. And say maybe we are moving forward with that, with Twitter, the sort of alt-lit scene that sort of spread from basically Brooklyn and on the internet through Taolin and those guys. That was sort of touching on what you can achieve very quickly from the internet. You look at, I mean, that is very true that the novel takes much longer than clicking play on an artist song, on Rihanna's song, and listening to it for 30 seconds and going, I don't like it. Yeah, I think that as a writer, you want maximum exposure. And those guys who burst onto that lit scene, which sort of appeared out of nowhere very quickly, and people were already coining some of those guys in the scene. I mean, they're not doing that textually and structurally. They're not doing things that are crazy different to anything that's gone before, but they're marketing it and using the internet in a way that hadn't. And that's just sort of touched the possibilities, I think, of maximizing exposure for a writer's work.
And I think in terms of like what the novel did for society, maybe up until the 60s versus music, it was a very much it was a sign of what's going on in the times. So people would read these and kind of have an idea of maybe where society is. To me, if you're going to say the novelist is doing that now, I can't agree with you. Like you look at Kendrick Lamar's album that he just put out a month ago, To Pimp a Butterfly. That is a very important piece of work, and he even as a rapper claims that he does not want to be called a rapper, he wants to be called a writer. And I would say that piece of work took just as much time and just as much emotion than writing any great novel. It's an amazing piece of literary work if you listen to his lyrics. So one of the reasons why he's relevant is that people are able to love him in a certain different way because he does, whether he's doing it or not. Maybe it's part of his entourage that's helping him get out there. I mean, he is connecting with fans in a way that is modern, in a way that I think a lot of his equivalent writers, because he's only 27, are not doing.
if I can comment, from what I understand, Vanny's saying is that so he posts this, but even though it took him maybe just as much amount of time as an emerging author to write it, you can listen to it quickly and you can decide, oh, right away I'm his fan. But for an author that's going to start using social media presence, it, like he said, will take time to read through it and decide whether or not, oh, by the end, I do like this author, I'm going to like his Facebook page. I think that's the difference.
I think it's a problem also of what structure you want to give to your work. I mean, my case, my debut book was a collection of 2 lines stories which were very popular on the internet, which is exactly what we're talking about. And this gathered more and more users. You know how I got the ideas, not because I had a project, because we had a literary magazine, and we could check the various, it was the early days of the internet, so that you could download the different short stories by clicking on them. And in the website where you could download them, you could see how many times they were downloaded and also the size of the file. And I noticed that the short files had hundreds of downloads, while the huge ones, even if they were, for example, short stories which were huge because there was an image, were never seen because people would not download the big file. And so I started with that, and that Personaggi Precari was very effective. It had even a new edition last year, and it was powerful in the social media. It worked well on Twitter, on Facebook, and it worked well as a blog. But of course, the downside, if you want, of course, one can say that if he's not, it was more, for example, in the Anglo-Saxon world, when it was translated in English, it was put in a collection in a magazine which was called 7 Contemporary Italian Poets. Even if it was prose, it was instantly identified and placed as prose poetry. Okay, in Italy maybe there is not a big tradition of prose poetry in the purest sense, so it was more considered prose, but of course this was not a novel. So it was also, I would say, dialoguing with a different canon. Maybe it was dialoguing more with poetry, with epigraphic literature. It was resonating in a whole different area of literature. While the novel, whether it's alive, dead, dying, whatever it's healthy, it dialogates with an entirely different canon, which involves basically other novels. So maybe we can discuss, I think we can discuss if it's still worth making big novels, or if we should definitely move to fast, short literature. And I think, because I did it personally, that for a young emerging author, it would definitely be better to start with short, fast literature, because it would be better spent on the internet, and then he would probably get to published easier this way than by writing a huge novel and sending it to publishing houses without even knowing if the envelope will be ever opened. But we must be aware in saying that if we say that, we are moving towards a different area of literature.
Yeah, that was great. Are there any last comments that you guys want to make before I open it up to questions? This has been great. Thank you guys. We've talked a lot about attention span, collective writing, social media dangers, possibilities, what authors should do. Do any of you guys have any questions you'd like to ask or any comments?
Hi, thank you. I guess in talking about the identity of the author and the importance of having access to that in today's world, it got me thinking about the ways in which our consciousness of an authorial identity really changes our sense of the work itself. There's a book I know Madison has read a little bit of in translation in French, written by a French writer, and it's titled, "And What If Works Changed Authorship?" And it imagines how we would receive texts if we understood their authors to be someone other than they are. And it's quite funny. It imagines if the Odyssey was written by a woman, or if Gone with the Wind were written by Tolstoy, and how would we read these differently? And I guess I'm thinking that the thing about a novel is that you enter consciousness in a way that is definitely different from the way you enter consciousness when you listen to Kendrick Lamar, right? Like the consciousness you enter in a novel is one that you kind of have to, there's something about sitting with it for a while and so on. And the separation of the author from the text kind of enables you to enter that consciousness, in my view. So in other words, if the less you know about the author, the more room you have as a reader to kind of imagine the text, participate in the construction of the text, and so forth. And it seems like one of the difficulties or problems we encounter now, or just based on this discussion as I see it, is that you want to have the authorial identity for marketing purposes in a way, but I think as a novelist, you kind of don't want your authorial identity to be too much in the ether, just because it robs something, I think, of the experience of the text, or it has the potential to. I remember liking kind of some of Philip Roth's novels and then meeting him and being like, what a jerk. I don't want to read any more of this. I had a sense the consciousness I was entering was not one I wanted to enter, and indeed, it kind of wasn't. But there is this effect, and it's one that I think, technology has to help us negotiate a little bit so we maintain that freedom of reading texts kind of freely and, with our, thinking of them as vehicles more than as kind of products. And it would seem like if the identity gets in the way, or it doesn't have to, but it seems like it could, right?
Yeah. And that sort of boils it down to the idea of who owns the text, whether the reader immediately takes ownership of the text, or whether the author still has ownership over what he's written. Whether, when the novel is finished and it's printed and it's passed on, does the author release all sort of authority over it, and the reader gains complete authority?
Right, and I guess with all the new, with all the media that you can use now to either open up the text and make it, even more of a kind of imaginative experience, or close it down and be like, all right, this is the music you have to listen to. And I think what was nice about what you described is that it's less controlling, the music that, it seems more evocative than, you need to see this to get this, or you need this information to be able to read this correctly. And I'm kind of old. It used to be that this was not old-fashioned, but now it feels old-fashioned to think like, no, give me some room here. I want to, I kind of want to explore this without being told how to read a text,
but
right?
I think that at the same time, like studying English literature at university, when you get given your text to read, the first thing that you're taught about that text is an A4 sheet about the writer. So and so.
I actually teach. I never do that.
Okay,
yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. That's cool. But I don't know. But in my experience, they're always the first bits of information.
Even in philosophy books, sometimes you get the biography of the philosopher before the concept.
It's in the cover. It's in the cover. So such and such was born here, grew up here, went to university here, perhaps didn't go to university, had a struggle here, did well here, is now writing here. And you find out all these. That is the first thing that I was always, first bits of information I was always given about text. So I'm already creating an image of the writer in my head before I've even seen the text.
I think that's especially true in academic contexts where your purpose isn't. There are multiple purposes. It's like you want the context. You want to see the culture out of which the text emerged. It's more sort of important to the work of an academic or a scholar to have that information. But in the world beyond the ivory tower, the experience of texts, I think, varies maybe a little bit more. I mean, it even varied for me within my own academic experience, and in my role, I feel like as a facilitator of the experience of literature, everyone has a different sense of how this goes down, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm sort of my point isn't that I'm advocating sort of full-blown exposure of the writer's personal life. I'm just looking at the technological vehicles that they can use to perhaps maximize exposure to their work, and that might involve being, I don't know, whether it involves being more in the limelight or not. I'm just looking at ways to maximize the readership of people's work, I guess.
I just think that there's the thing is the crux of the issue is accessibility versus context. Because if we go back to Kendrick Lamar, if I have the context of his childhood and I have the context of Racial Issue News America, I can understand his album. However, when I have access to him talking about that album and explaining, like him actually explaining why he wrote a certain song and what motivated it and how the process was for him to go through that song, it kind of gave it an entirely different meaning. And like going back to like if I met Kendrick Lamar and then like he spoke to me about it and I just hated the way he talked about it, like that to me would also change the effect of it.
We were just talking about this the other day, where you were saying, Philly, that you were really into Tupac Shakur, and then you read about his personal history. Some of it is not so great.
It's a scary thing with anything. If you invest a lot of love and enjoyment and time into something, and then you find out that the person who created that isn't a nice person, or you don't like aspects of it, it's heartbreaking.
I think in the opposite to that, like if we're going to keep using Kendrick Lamar, because I think he's an important person to cross this boundary between music and literature, is his first album is theoretically a fictional album. It's got fictional characters. He uses different voices to voice his characters. There's a whole plot line. Like I know that I've actually spoken to a professor in a school in Georgia who uses that album to then study Joyce and Toni Morrison and some other author. And that one, I mean, I know all about him, but he wrote something fictional, and I'm able to connect with that in a certain way that I think means that you don't, even if you know the person, if they do well enough and they're conscious of making something that is universal enough, you can get into that. And there's another book that's come out recently called 1004 by Ben Lerner, and that one's, there's a lot of debate over that, because that one is, again, very, you basically realize that this is just Ben Lerner. It is not it's not really, most people would say it's not a fictional character. It has all this life history and all this kind of stuff. But his, this kind of, it makes you really adjust or question how you're thinking about the conscious, because you're wanting to be that character, I guess, because that you're reading as that as the narrator, but then you kind of know about him, and he says in interviews he'll say he's not the character. So then you have to question, like, could anyone besides him be the narrator? And so it throws that whole idea into shift of like, can I even be this narrator? And then they connected that one. Maybe to take it to movies, which is a different one. Is the Birdman, for example, is one that they compared Ben Lerner's work with this movie because what's the main character's name? Main actor's name? Michael Keaton. That movie could only be Michael Keaton because it is Batman. We know him as Batman. We wonder if that could be any other character besides Michael Keaton playing it, and so it kind of throws that whole logic. Yeah, exactly. The movie poster in that thing is just the Batman poster. It makes you really question that separation between what we know about people because of the internet, because of social media, and how their fiction is part of our life.
Right, I guess it seems to me that there's this other use then for technology, which is to play with that narrator and play with the authorial kind of imagination and authorial relationship, and say like, well, we can tell you that the author is this person and construct a kind of personality for the author, but don't believe, which you shouldn't anyway, don't believe this construction necessarily.
I think that's the natural thing to happen, because if we do believe that we need to be more, the artist needs to be more in the limelight, then they need to then figure out a way to create something that allows them to maybe go and try new things.
We see that with authors who take on pseudonyms, right? Like Romain Gary and Émile Ajar. Like that there's a way in which shifting your personality allows you to write in ways and be received in ways that you wouldn't have been otherwise. And that might be an interesting kind of use of technology, that you don't have to, you can create an author without it being you, and maybe it's better that it's not you, right?
And that brings on another, the internet provides you the opportunity to create multiple authors for yourself. You can write in 5 or 6 different frames of mind completely anonymously. It's scary, but entertaining and exciting, I guess.
Are there any other questions or comments? Well, thank you guys.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Wait. We have one more question.
I wanted to ask about the dislike for self-publishing and why.
Well, you start.
Well, who starts? Well, I would not talk about disdain. I was grown in self-productions, so But if I have printed my own magazines and I have bothered people to get stuff where my texts were written, and I have the maximum respect for the do-it-yourself scene also in literature. What we mean by self-publishing are self-publishing platforms like lulu.com, for example, or this Il Mio Libro in Italy, which simulate and sell to people basically the idea of being published. Not in that sense. Of course, when self-publishing is what we call autoproduzione in Italy, self-production, do-it-yourself, underground press, then I prefer that to the big publishers. I'm just like, I come exactly from that scene. And we had even a tiny board where we sold the self-productions in music as well, because we were in connection with punk and rave scenes. So we were definitely into that. What we're talking about self-publishing, it's these huge platforms. These huge platforms, usually controlled by, for example, newspaper. It's La Repubblica, which controls this Il Mio Libro or Io Scrittore. And which creates basically this sick down scene which has no dialogue and interaction with the real publishing scene, but also no contact or interaction with the real underground. It's sort of a limbus, no? A middle ground where nothing happens and people just give 5 stars to each other on Anobi or Goodreads to get the 5 stars, but these books don't circulate. And basically the problem is that in real publishing there is also, even if publishing has its own problems and once good publishers now also publish bad books by famous, for example, TV characters just to gather some money, but still publishing, it's also a cultural filter, okay? So the main role in the cultural industry and in the culture of a country of publishing houses is to decide what it's gonna get published, what's not, and by that way shaping the canon. While on the other side, self-productions create a counterculture. Because why? Not because they just want to be perceived as writers, because they don't agree with what the establishment says or publishes, and so we produce them, and also we do it because we have or we aim to create our own circuit of audience. We have an alternative countercultural audience, and that has been essential for in many other arts as well. While these self-publishing platforms play in a middle ground which is neither, and it gives people the illusion of publishing, and often I think it creates damage to the literary scene, because, for example, there are lots of people which get annoyed with the fact that the big publishers are not reading their manuscripts very early, or on the other side, they don't have the network and the will to really self-produce something nice which is worth giving around, and so they take this easy path which then brings them nowhere. And maybe some of these people had stuff to say, and maybe they just needed a bit more effort.
So essentially, you think it's a trick that gets money off people who are desperate to be writers and see that you can be self-published if you click here and you put your bank details in here, and then it goes nowhere. Yeah. It only goes to other people who are also doing that, who are going to give you 5 stars, so that you then give them. Yeah,
absolutely. But also because there is an ideological level as well. When we were doing the Mostro magazine, which was a self-production, which was distributed in squats and occupied houses around Italy. Hell, we were proud that we were not published by the big publisher, okay? So we got pride in our being underground, even of course if we had also the ambition of publishing with the big publishers. Okay, let's not be hypocritical. There were just 2 different discourses, and this discourse was underground because it has a certain type of content. It posed itself also in a contextative way, while the self-publishing platforms put themselves in a area which is a bit of simulating the fact of being writers, and this way it basically, I think, sells an illusion. It sells a fake patent of being a writer.
Yeah. This is the social aspect of the self-publishing that is very dangerous. No, the idea that the publisher, the main publishers control all the wannabe writers. No. controlling their minds and their expectations, say you can be a writer too. Just put online your and in this community you can be a writer. You can publish your book, and probably you can write. No? Without any effort. Without any effort means also publishing in literary reviews, and also this debate is it's a way to be an author, to be a writer, as well, and work a lot. So it's not only put online something and working in this gray area of self-esteeming, and so this is the side that we don't like of self-publishing.
But I would not call their project self-publishing. It's something completely different. I would call it do-it-yourself or self-production. It's something completely different, structurally, ideological, and in terms of distribution. I mean, let's not make this mistake of considering a self-produced object of art, which goes in his own network, what we meant till this moment in self-publishing, which is a specific platform imitating a structure of a publishing house, but accepting everybody.
And also they have a real community of writers, and that's...
But of course, but that's it's really two different things. Maybe there is also a misunderstanding, because maybe it in English self-publishing doesn't have this negative definition as it has in Italian. In Italian we say autoproduzioni and self-publishing, and they refer to something. Theirs, it's clearly an autoproduzione, while self-publishing involves a third part, which is a self-publishing platform.
So for those of us here who don't know exactly what you guys do, maybe you can talk a little bit before we end, just so everyone knows and they can see there.
So me and Will were both living in Paris. We were going to spoken word poetry events in Paris. People were reading their work and we were really enjoying it. It was an English-speaking poetry event. We went to the two of them a week. And we'd go to everyone and we'd hear work that we liked, but we'd never be able to read it again. We'd never be able to go back, and if there was a part that was read out that we particularly liked, we wouldn't be able to listen to it again. And we realized that this was happening all over the world. So we met the next day, and 10 days later we released our first issue and got it stocked in local bookstores in Paris, set up on the internet, Twitter, Facebook, social, other forms of WordPress, and made it so that people could buy it on the internet. And since then, we've printed 290 writers in the last 2 years from about 30 different countries. So yeah.
Well, we have free copies for everyone, so you can see what it looks like yourself.
Pardon?
Can I keep this?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
Because it's very beautiful.
Cool.
If anyone,
it is number 35.
Yeah.
Okay.
If anyone didn't hear, we have free copies, so you can see
Yeah.
what they look like. You can hold them in your hand. It's a lot easier to see what they look like then.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you guys for being here and discussing. This was a really great conversation. I feel like we could go on forever about this. I also want to thank all of you guys for coming out. I know it's a really busy time with finals and everything. We're all antsy to get out the door. But I also just wanted to remind you that tomorrow we're having a workshop here for NYU students only, I'm sorry, but with Will and James. Maybe we'll see. And then also on Wednesday, a little different, but I will be moderating a conversation with Dale Ratstein, who is visiting from, who will be here from UNICEF Office of Research in Florence, which will totally different subject, but it'll be really interesting. But anyways, thanks again for coming, and enjoy snacks in the back.
Thank you for coming, guys.